This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. S. Leo Chiang's documentary films explore lives across continents and culture, from the first Vietnamese-American congressman to the first LGBT political party in the Philippines to a legendary Hawaiian ukulele player. His latest film, the documentary short Island in Between, has been nominated for an Academy Award. Its subject, Taiwan's Kinmen Island, and Chiang's own relationship to his native Taiwan, couldn't be more timely in the wake of Taiwan's recent presidential election and as Congress considers a foreign aid package with billions of dollars at stake for Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific region. Leo, welcome to Political Theater.
Thank you, Jason. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. So a little recap of your film, before we get into some of the, drill down. I mean, this is on New York Times Op Docs. People can see it there and on YouTube. It's a personal documentary, but it's also a documentary about this island that is, I think in your words in it, China is right there. Kinmen Island is Taiwan, but it is 2 miles from the Chinese mainland, and the film explores your relationship with your own native Taiwan. Your father was stationed there during his military service for Taiwan. You have these great interactions with people on Kinmen Island. Just talk about the film and what brought you to this project.
You just named off some of my previous films. I'm one of those documentary filmmakers who is curious about cultures and people and places that's other than my own, really. For my entire career, I've been working in those spaces. But in the last several years, so I was born and raised in Taiwan, and I moved to the U.S. as a teenager. But about 7 years ago, I decided to move back to Taipei because my parents have never left. We're still there, and we're getting older, and I find myself also working more and more in Asia. So it seemed to make sense to move back there. I think after moving back there, one of my frustrations is that it seems like it's very difficult to tell Taiwanese stories for the international audience. People always know Taiwan in the context of China, if at all, right? Like the joke for us Taiwanese is people ask us if we have any great Thai food lately, and if we are from Bangkok, and I think also because in the last couple of years, there has been more interest in Taiwan. I think it's a combination of how Taiwan has managed COVID really well. Definitely the chip wars that's happening right now with the between U.S. and China. Try to get these high-end chips. But also, with Pelosi's visit and the tension escalating, it felt like there was a great window to tell a Taiwanese story for the international audience. There's been a lot of really wonderful journalism reporting around the issue of the Taiwan Strait. I thought what I could bring to this was a very personal take, on the Taiwan story, and also because I have this transnational background. I am a Taiwanese and an American passport holder. I felt like I was the right person to take the Taiwanese stories and translate it basically for the international audience. So that's really how this film came about.
And again, Kinmen Island is just so fascinating to me. I mean, in your film, you liken it, and other people have likened it to Berlin during the Cold War, where it's not just 2 miles from the Chinese mainland. It's also surrounded by China's mainland. It's like I think one like a State Department or something like that. Educational film refers to it in the film that you have as the cork, in the bottle or and it is this, I think that Americans in particular are almost inured sometimes to how far off wars can be that we're involved in, or conflict. We don't really have. I mean, there's tension on the southern border right now. With the immigration debate and that sort of is particularly in Texas, but we don't have anything like guns pointed at us, like from and such a level of international tension and hostility between two areas. And I think it's also the images. You pack a lot into 19 minutes in this documentary, because you've got your own story, you've got your parents, you've got the people on the island, and some of the images that you show in this, they're just gorgeous. Like some of the man-made stuff, there with the towers and the lights in both on Kinmen and in the mainland. And then also just like you have this image that's everywhere, this sinking tank, this World War II era tank that's sinking into the beach, and people doing fashion shoots there and so forth. It's just this great, like, how did you even pare it down? Because it seems like there's so much there to cover. How did you get it into 20 minutes?
I think that was, people ask me what was the biggest challenge to make this film, and then I really do think it's kind of a simple film and a simple story. It's a glimpse. It's nothing complicated. We're not trying to give a really comprehensive situation, sort of description of the situation, but that is exactly why it was difficult, because we had to take these really rich, layers of history, definitely between Taiwan and China, but U.S. played a huge role, as you're mentioning, and try to pare that down into something that feels like, a spare, it makes room for these images that, that I hope actually tells a lot of the story and then fills in a lot of holes. Yeah, I mean, I think that the big challenge there was always like, how do I personalize this really complicated geopolitical situation, right? I mean, I could give you a history lesson, but I think that people are intrigued or compelled or connect to a story the most when you touch them in the heart, in addition to in the head. And you have to pick just the right details and just the right images that is resonant, that's memorable, right? I mean, both that image of the tank and that broadcast tower, especially in the evening, are very memorable. So I think for me, those were the biggest challenges, to pick just the right words and write just the right narration to describe the situation. And I mean, Kinmen it's such a fascinating place. It really is. And in terms of American involvement, if you Google the name, the old English name for Kinmen, which is Quemoy, Quemoy, and Nixon Kennedy, you'll find this portion of the 1960s presidential debate when the two of them talked about the Kinmen Islands, in addition to Matsu Island, which is another set of islands, just in similar situation further north, where Kennedy says it's really dumb for Americans to help the Chinese Nationalist Army to defend these two islands that are really militarily really strategically poorly positioned. The military should retreat from these two islands and just defend the Taiwan Strait, which is a more natural barrier between Taiwan and China, where Nixon comes out and say, we're not giving those commies a single inch of the free land. I think that's the difficult part, is even though the U.S. has been involved, and I not just involved, integrally involved, right? And until today, the Americans have just very little knowledge of the situation there, and it is very far away, all the way literally on the other side of the globe. So
I wonder if also part of it is just this sort of, particularly after the United States recognized communist China as China in the UN and stopped its recognition of Taiwan, or as the the legitimate Chinese government. We've had, the United States has had this sort of strategic ambivalence about Taiwan, about, there is, an embassy here in the United States, but they can't call it an embassy. There's an ambassador, but they can't call him an ambassador. Every time somebody, talks to President Biden about Taiwan, his aides, you can just feel them clench up that, he's going to say something that is going to offend either the Chinese or the Taiwanese government. And we just, and that sense, I think that what's a real strength of your film is that you take that there is that sort of weird in-betweenness, if you will, of the United States relationship and other countries' relationship to Taiwan. And it's also a part of your own identity. Like there's this great scene where you lay out all three passports that you have. Your American passport, your Taiwanese passport, and then it's called what is it? The companion passport, the Chinese?
The Taiwanese compatriot. I don't know what the appropriate translation is. It basically like a residence permit where, right, from the Chinese government's perspective, I'm a Chinese national, right? So that's my ID in their eyes, So the compatriot permit.
Yeah, and just communicating that, and we're talking about 80 going on 75, 80 years of this weird relationship that the United States has to Taiwan, and it is what I find fascinating too is that it's not a static one, even now, because as you hinted this in your film too, that there are 24 million people who live on Taiwan, and most of them are a lot of them have been born since from the 60s on, when things started to change with Taiwan's relationship to the UN and the United States, and they think of themselves as Taiwanese, not necessarily as Taiwanese first, not the party of nationalist China after World War II. And it's just this, again, sort of a fascinating viewpoint of like this rapidly evolving culture at the same time that the political system is also rapidly evolving.
I think that sometimes people have this idea that identity, it's like as we grow up, as we kind of, start to self-actualize, right? Start to learn who we are as people. It's like we're going on a treasure hunt for this identity thing, and you dig it out and you open a box and there it is. That's my identity, and I'm taking it. I know who I am now, and I'm done. But that's not the case. I mean, I guess especially for people like me, people in Taiwan, where the situation around you are constantly evolving, and your relationship to it is constantly evolving. I think that you're describing this sort of transition from Taiwan being the quote unquote free China because of the it being run or led by the losing side of the Chinese Civil War for so many years, to now where the younger generation don't know the war at all, and they just fully embrace this Taiwanese identity, and they're really confused about why Taiwan is not seen as a country, because we have a president, we have a legislature, we have mayors down to the neighborhood association head. Why we have a fully functioning democratic government that has consistently 70-80% of voting rate. I mean, that's unthinkable in the US. And we're not a country, because our neighborhood bully says, well, that's not a person over there, even though it looks like a person, it acts like a person, it's not a person. So it's when you have that it sort of, I don't know, in some ways it messes with the heads of the people that live in Taiwan, right? And then so it is this constantly evolving relationship to what it means to be a Taiwanese person, and this constantly evolving relationship with China and with U.S.
Right, and you should mention too that you've done work in China. One of your more recent films, Our Time Machine, is set in China. It's about takes place in the Shanghai Opera House. Some of it. I mean, like you have spent time in China and worked in China, and there's a passage in your film where you talk about like how when you went there after you were expecting basically the way people describe North Korea, and it was this incredibly vibrant place, and the ferry between Kinmen and the mainland was restarted, and there was like a little bit more interaction. And then COVID, just as it did it disrupted all of that, and it's again like it's not just I think you really touch on that, how this is complicated because it isn't so much that it's a political thing, but a lot of the people in China and Taiwan don't view each other as enemies. They're it's like literally the neighbor, right?
I would say that most people in China and Taiwan don't view each other as enemies. When it's all said and done, we are ethnically, at least the majority of Taiwan and the majority of China are ethnically Han Chinese, and we do share the same history, and I think that. I think that's for me, this is actually, as I'm saying this, I'm actually struggling as well, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I look at what China's doing in terms of its policy outwards and its policy inwards, and I think that government is just doing a terrible job.
Right.
But at the same time, I have such fondness for the people, and for the place, and I find the place just really fascinating. And I know a lot of my friends in China, or my friends who are Chinese in diaspora, they feel the same way, about the Taiwanese people. And so when we have this reading about the tension up and down, and the fact that China might be militarily threatening Taiwan, it's just hard for us to process, and it's hard for us to sort of find a way to critique China, but without painting it as this, evil monolith, which is, I think, the issue with some of the international coverage of China is that people are simplifying it to be this like sort of monolithic. People are all drones, and they believe in, what Xi Jinping says, and they do all these terrible things. But that simply is not the case. People have thoughts and ideas, and they're not allowed to express themselves, perhaps, or they're trying to express themselves in ways, more underground, more sort of hidden ways. But there's a diverse population and diverse opinion in China as there is in Taiwan. So. Yeah, it's a very interesting situation right now.
And I can't help but feel too that one of the reasons for some of the escalating anxiety, about what could happen is that in the case of Hong Kong, when the British relinquished control in 1997, there was still for years an independent press, and I mean as a film buff, like I love so much of the cinema that came out of Hong Kong. And it had a more distinct, like world that seemed like it could continue. And then we saw this crackdown, in this gradual ramping up of, cracking down on the press. And I think that is because Taiwan has so much of its own culture and developing, and including the film community. I do want to talk about the film community in Taiwan, because it's an incredibly diverse and interesting and crazy, film community, that there is this anxiety that could happen if there's a peaceable solution to, I think somebody talked about the inevitability of China and Taiwan, kind of coming back together, and what that would mean. Would it be another situation like Hong Kong?
Well, I think if China is trying to convince Taiwan to accept this, sort of one nation, two system, arrangement, I think what they did in Hong Kong just sort of ruined that deal. I mean, there's no way the Taiwanese people is going to believe China now when they say, yes, we'll get together and you get to do your own thing for the next 100 years. I mean, that's what they told Hong Kong. I mean, not specifically that scope, right? I'm just sort of throwing the 100 years out as a as a random number. But the fact is, China had promised Hong Kong self-rule for decades, and in a matter of I don't know, 20. I guess it is also been already 30 years.
27, 27, almost
Yeah,
27 years since the handover.
Right, 27 years. That's it. Yeah, almost 30 years. And then they just decided that they're done, and the system or this arrangement is no longer. And that whatever in Hong Kong turned the Taiwanese public opinion squarely against China. I mean, people just don't trust China anymore. So yeah, I mean, people see China, people are worried. And I don't want to paint this picture of like people are sitting all day long fretting and thinking about this, because in Taiwan, people are going on about their lives, and some people really do see this as just another blip in the 70 years of the same thing. Maybe it's a little bit more tense than 10 years ago, but it's still not the way that the outsiders, the international press is painting it. But at the same time, no one is looking at China and thinking, oh yeah, I'm sorry, no one's looking at Hong Kong and thinking that China is a credible partner, in any negotiation coming up. And then the frustration though is also that the Chinese government, the way they make decisions is so opaque and unpredictable. So it's not like there's a pattern where you could kind of figure out what they're going to do next, so I think Taiwanese people do live in this limbo, and it's a limbo that we have no control over. And again, I mean, that's not the whole of our existence, but that's a big part of our existence that we deal with. And that's kind of what I wanted to present in this film. Really, it's that feeling of being in limbo, and that feeling of being stuck in between.
Yeah. No, I think it's communicated very well. And so I'm going back to, the again, being a part of like this very vibrant film culture in Taiwan. And again, I realize that I am in the minority, because I'm that much of a film dork, that I've attended, like screenings, here in Washington. Washington, is, again, it's a different audience. You can screen Taiwanese films and people will come, and maybe that's not the case in, some other places, but, we're very, with the Taiwanese, the Educational and Cultural Authority, TECRO, I think they're called, they sponsor a lot of events here. There's actually an incredible restaurant here in DC, Makedo, that the chef is Taiwanese-American, Eric Yang. I mean, so I'm a little bit more invested in it, perhaps. But talk about this. You are now, you're living in Taipei. I mean, you're coming to us from San Francisco, but you're living more in Taipei. As you stated at the beginning of the podcast. Talk about like being a part of that film culture, because there's a lot of people who live in Taiwan, but it's got to be a small town for the movies.
Well, I mean, I think folks know Taiwanese cinema, right? The new Taiwanese cinema with Ho Xiaoxian and Edward Yang and Tsai Ming-liang, and I think maybe more people know about Ang Lee, who I guess maybe people don't know that he's Taiwanese. They probably think he's Chinese, or he's definitely ethnically Chinese. So there's been a rich history of cinema in Taiwan. And you were mentioning Hong Kong cinema back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, the two film community were quite integrated. The Taiwanese actors will go and make movies in Hong Kong, and people collaborate. And we certainly grew up watching Jackie Chan movies and whatnot. So
John Woo movies and Chow Yun-fat and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're a film buff. I'm a film buff. I mean, that's how I became a filmmaker, because I just love. I think those were always my favorite time. In as a child, is spending those 2-3 hours, or I guess movies weren't as long then.
No, they weren't.
Maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours, right? In the dark theater. And the documentary community is also very much growing, and it's becoming more vibrant. There's actually kind of significant support from the government for documentary filmmakers. I think that some of the challenges that we have with the documentary field is that there isn't necessarily an understanding of the international audience. There's actually, I mean, there have been really incredible sort of box office setting documentaries that domestically gross more than a lot of the Hollywood films, but there's not as much that are sort of accepted or sort of celebrated internationally. So that's what we're hoping to change. We're hoping that coming up, we can be a part of this this movement to get more Taiwanese nonfiction out in the world. But yeah, I mean, like I love Edward Yang's film. I love I always say that English name wrong. A Brighter Summer Day. I think that's a. Do you know that film?
No.
Yeah, it's actually it's very long. It's like a 4-hour epic. But it's amazing because it does what I want to do in my films, which is that take a very personal approach to this really epic, geopolitical situation. I mean, it is about the arrival of the nationalists, from China to Taiwan, and what happened to the Taiwanese during that time. The oppression, some of the sort of more violent things that happened during that time, but it's framed around this really innocent love story between two teenagers. It's the lead.
Add something to the queue now.
Yeah, you should watch it. The lead is a teenage Zhang Zhen, who is a Taiwanese actor who played the doctor in Dune most recently. And do you know who he is? Yeah. So he's a Taiwanese actor. So he was like 16 years old, and he was the lead in that film. So it's a really beautiful film. So please catch it if you can. And Ang Lee, I mean, what can you say about that guy? I mean, just such an inspiration. The fact that he can tell stories from all different cultures and all different backgrounds, and just really, just allowing the audience to connect to all these different characters as human beings, the way he humanizes a situation. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, no, I think that that seems to be what you're attempting with your own films too. Is taking these very, kind of potentially complicated, shall we say, political situations or cultural situations, and zeroing in on a few lives and a few images and weaving them. So, again, the movie, your movie is Island in Between. It's nominated for an Academy Award. This must be talk about limbo. You've still got a few weeks before you find out. Anyway, that's time to get fitted into your tux and so forth, right? For your trip down to Hollywood. Anything else we should know before we wrap things up?
No. I'm just thrilled that the stories out there, that I get to introduce a little bit of Taiwan, to the world, and people are getting curious, and like you said, Jason, it's available on the New York Times website, and it's also available on their YouTube channel, the New York Times YouTube channel. So it's actually readily accessible.
And it is not 4 hours long. It is 19 minutes. It's very digestible.
It's low commitment at 19 minutes, not even 20 minutes. You can watch it at lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Leo, thank you so much for taking time to talk about your movie. I encourage everybody to watch it. Good luck at the Academy Awards. I can't imagine what's going through your head, and enjoy the run up to it. And would love to have you back again. I wish we were doing this podcast in 2012 when Mr. Cow Goes to Washington came out. But we'll maybe another time. Maybe we'll do a rewatch or something like that and try to get you back on the show.
Anytime, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.